Speaker is Vice Admiral Ray Griggs, AO, CSC, RAN, the Chief of Navy. Ray, warm welcome to the University of Canberra. And on behalf of Professor Stephen Parker, the Vice-Chancellor of the University, it's my pleasure to formally welcome you to the University. Thank you for coming today and agreeing to talk to us about the Royal Australian Navy. This is the fourth year that the National Security Lecture Series has been running, and we're proud that so many prominent officials have been able to come to the University and give their views on national security and the challenges facing Australia in the future. And if there's one organisation that is at the heart of security considerations in Australia today, it's the Royal Australian Navy. On a daily basis, we hear of the difficult tasks that our Navy faces in providing border protection and security for Australia. In conjunction with Customs and Border Protection and many other government agencies, they face frequent demands on their professionalism and skills off the northwest coast of Australia. But at the same time, Navy ships and Navy personnel are deployed across the globe in support of Australia's national interests in places like the Afghanistan campaign, off the coast in Somalia in anti-piracy operations and a wide range of other operations. There's a lot happening and Navy's in the thick of it. And as Chief of Navy, Admiral Griggs is responsible to raise, train and sustain the Navy. It's a difficult and demanding task, and Ray, if I may say so, I think you're doing it with aplomb, with vigour and determination. But as well as providing forces for current operations, the Navy also has to deliver the future. I'm looking forward to your talk today, and I'm sure that you'll talk about the challenges that the Navy faces today, but I also hope that you'll talk very much about the future and what the Navy will look like in 10, 15 and 20 years' time. Because from where I sit, the Navy is doing very difficult and demanding global tasks with great skill, professionalism, assuredness and compassion. I think we should be proud of what the Navy is achieving. Vice Admiral Griggs has been Chief of Navy since 2011. He served on a wide range of naval ships and has studied in the United Kingdom and the United States. He commanded the Anzac-class frigate HMAS Arunta, was himself involved in border protection duties as part of Operation Relics, also was deployed to the Persian Gulf to enforce United Nations sanctions against Iraq in support of the war on terror. And in case you think it's just all about ships, he's also been the Deputy Maritime Fleet Commander, Director General Naval Strategic Policy and Futures, and led the development of the Force Structure Review that provided the force structure underpinning for the 2009 White Paper. And before assuming his command as Chief of Navy, he was Deputy Chief of Joint Operations. No stranger to universities, he holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Queensland, a Master of Business Administration from the National Graduate School of Management at the Australian National University, and a Master of Science in National Security Strategy from the National Defence University in Washington, DC. Ray, thank you for agreeing to come and talk to us today. I invite you to address the audience.
Thanks, Peter. One thing I've not mastered yet in this job is getting lectern heights or microphone heights right. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today and to talk about the Navy and its role in national security. As I always do when I give these speeches, I'm at great pains to stress that while the lens that I'm looking through today is a naval one, it can't be discussed in isolation from the joint and integrated effect of all the elements of national power that we need to use to achieve our national security objectives. I do want to focus today on the military element and start by talking about the joint nature of the Australian Defence Force. For the record, I think that the ADF is a far more joint organisation than many give it credit for. The senior ADF leadership could not be more joined up on the key issues, even as they struggle with their own individual service challenges and the broader ADF and portfolio challenges that we face. I think what we have at present is a very pragmatic approach to building a truly effective joint force. The last thing we need at the moment are ideologues and zealots. We need leadership that recognises the constraints and the realities that we are operating under, picks the right issues to focus on and to take us forward. And I think we have that. In pure military terms, the ADF cannot afford to do anything other than in a joint way. We are simply too small in the grand scheme of things to duplicate functions. That said, we do need to continue to value the individual capabilities that services bring to the joint fight. Right now, we're seeing that play out in Exercise Talisman Sabre, our key bilateral warfighting exercise activity with the United States. But what I want to talk about today is not so much about jointery, nor even the Navy so much, but about the maritime context that should shape our strategic thought. Now, the chart on the screen behind me is one way to view that maritime context. It is, of course, a chart of the Indo-Pacific, which shows two great oceans, critical maritime trade routes, and provides a glimpse into the complexities of the maritime terrain, particularly in relation to maritime boundaries and key hydrographic features. I think it's fair to say that many people look at a map, see the blue, and don't see the complexities that are hidden, just as some of us at sea sometimes look at the yellow, which is the land on a chart, and don't appreciate the complexities that are hidden there. It's a lot to take in, but I'm going to leave it up for most of the speech so you can absorb it, and if you just get bored you can just look at it. In saying that the maritime context should shape our strategic thought, I suppose I have tipped my hand already, because I don't think the reality of our maritime context genuinely does shape our strategic thought. I would contend that it used to, of course. We cast our mind back to 1902, and I'll quote not an admiral, but a general, Major General Ed Hutton, our first Chief of Army, or as he was known, the Commandant of the Military Forces of the Commonwealth. And he said the defence of Australia cannot, moreover, be considered apart from the defence of Australian interests. Australia depends for its commercial success and its future development, firstly upon its seaborne trade, and secondly upon the existence, maintenance and extension of fixed and certain markets for its produce outside Australian waters. It therefore follows that Australian interests cannot be assured by the defence alone of Australian soil. Now, the government of the day, or the period, agreed with that maritime outlook expressed by Hutton, and also expressed by our first Chief of Navy, Vice Admiral Sir William Creswell, and others, of course. And in 1909, the government made the decision to purchase its own modern fleet of ships. In essence, it was a decision to buy a navy, the first major purchase of the Commonwealth Government. Now, the majority of that fleet sailed into Sydney Harbour on the 4th of October 1913, a truly significant day for this nation, a day that we will commemorate on the 4th of October this year, commemorating the centenary of that ship, of those ships arriving in Sydney Harbour. At the heart of the concerns in that early post-Federation era was the threat of disruption of trade and communications, disruption of the lifeline that was crucial to Australia's prosperity. It was, in short, concern about us being able to protect our ability to trade. Until recently, that point in time was probably the high watermark of strategic maritime awareness. Some will no doubt take issue with that statement. But from 1914 on, a series of conflicts followed that led the national consciousness, for very understandable reasons, down a different path. People became more concerned with what happened ashore than at sea. And that is despite the crucial nature of some of the maritime campaigns within those conflicts. We've only recently just seen in the UK the 70th anniversary of the Battle of the Atlantic, which combined with the Arctic convoy run to Murmansk, were among the most significant actions in World War II because they enabled outcomes of such strategic import for the entire war, often overlooked. As a result, we have allowed our strategic discourse to become very land-centric. It is always critical, when I say that, for me to stress that I do not use this term in a pejorative way. But the continentalist and expeditionary schools of thought remain fundamentally land-centric schools, and they do not pay enough heed to our maritime context. Australia, as Michael Wesley said last year, needs a well-developed maritime imagination. The implication, I think, is clear. He doesn't think we have one. And I would tend to agree with him. I do need to stress, though, when I talk of the maritime context or of maritime strategy, I'm not talking about a naval context or a naval strategy. It's important that I say that because if I don't, people tend to draw the wrong inference from what I'm saying. So is a land-centric strategic discourse a problem? And if it is, why? I think these are good questions and they need to be examined. And I would maintain that we are now more dependent on the maritime domain for our prosperity as a nation and our security than at any time in the past. I want to take you through some key statistics to try and reinforce that view. Our sovereign maritime zones cover around 1.5 times the continental landmass of Australia. So that's about 12.65 million square kilometres. Our search and rescue area we have responsibility for covers around 11% of the world's surface. 98% of our trade by volume moves by sea, yet we have no significant domestic merchant marine. Our exports make up around 21% of our GDP. That's up from 15% in the 1980s. 70% of the output of our key bulk commodities, coal and wheat, good examples, are exported. 40% of our two-way trade is between 3 countries, China, Japan, South Korea, and most of it travels through waterways where sovereignty is disputed. A recent NRMA study reported that Australia's net import holdings for liquid fuels has dropped from a stockpile measured at 310 days in 2002 to just 71 days in 2012. And this 71-day net import figure is estimated to equate to only 23 days of actual consumption. There are about only half a dozen key submarine cables which carry our connectedness to the rest of the world. And about 78% of our crude oil and 92% of our natural gas reserves are concentrated in the northwest, largely offshore. For me, that's why a land-centric view is problematic and why we have been working to reinforce the notion of the need to develop a robust maritime school of thought as the intellectual underpinning for the maritime strategy which we are pursuing. Now, this school of thought should, of course, be relevant to Australia. It should have an appreciation of our geographic, economic and diplomatic situation. It should include an appreciation of our interests, relative strengths and weaknesses, and it must be framed by a clear statement of our national aims and the manner in which we wish to pursue them. So with these statistics in mind, in framing a maritime school of thought, I think there are a few things that we must recognise. Firstly, the school of thought must recognise the sheer scale of our sovereignty and the area we can exercise sovereign rights over. Now, those two things are slightly different. It must recognise the increased pervasiveness of maritime trade and our national dependence on it for our ongoing prosperity. It must recognise the increased value of activity in our maritime environment, be it oil and gas installations offshore, alternative energy generation, the value of the maritime biodiversity reflected in both tourism and food security, particularly the value of farmed and wild fish stocks. It must also recognise that our terms of trade play a significant role in the growth of our real gross national income. But it must also recognise the fundamental vulnerabilities that our geostrategic situation exposes us to in such a highly interconnected and just-in-time economic system. I think it also must recognise the importance of collaboration and cooperation in keeping the global commons and our global maritime trading system free and open. Of course, no single maritime-focused force can achieve this mission. Not one. There must be cooperative arrangements and contributions across the whole system. And of course, this mission cannot be achieved solely with the military instrument of power, as is made quite clear in the Australian and the Asian White Century White Paper. Importantly, no school of thought should be reverse engineered to prop up an existing force structure, naval or otherwise, or used as a crutch to justify reductions when times are tight. So what does this mean from a maritime perspective? I think the first thing to recognise is that our strategic economic centre of gravity is not the resources in and on the land, nor the manufacturing capacity of our industry. In my view, it has always been our ability to trade, the importance of getting imports in, most obviously in a strategic sense fuel, and critically to get our exports out. And this gives the Australian Defence Force a central role in a crucial national mission, the protection of our ability to trade, the very thing that underpins our national prosperity. This is a mission that starts at home with port and critical infrastructure defence, but equally involves key choke points, and you can see some of them on the screen behind me, and shipping lanes throughout the end-to-end global maritime trading system. Taken together, I think this explains why Australia's fundamental approach to military matters is encapsulated in a maritime strategy. It means the protection of critical offshore infrastructure, which in the not-so-distant future may exist up to 350 nautical miles offshore. That's about 650 kilometres, which is pretty much the distance between Canberra and Melbourne, let alone the sovereign territory that we must defend, which lies offshore. This is a whole-of-government task, from Department of Regional Australia keeping runways operating at Cocos Island and Christmas Island, to Customs and Border Protection managing port and border security, and Customs and Defence maintaining security of our critical offshore infrastructure. Militarily, it means that we need an ADF that has both reach and endurance if we are to properly play our part in this cooperative and collaborative task, particularly further from our shores. And that role needs to be played in both peacetime and needs to be effectively managed if we're involved in combat operations. It is crucial, for example, that we have frigates and submarines that can be operated and sustained where they need to operate in this system, that we have surveillance assets that can do likewise, that we have the ability to deploy and sustain credible and potent land forces to support the broader national objectives. So how do we go about protecting our ability to trade and in turn our national prosperity? First, we need to start at the national level. Australia plays a key role in ensuring that there is a functioning rules-based global order. There are a range of international conventions, such as the UN Convention for the Law of the Sea, the Safety of Life at Sea Convention, the International Search and Rescue Convention, among others, that lay down the ground rules for how we operate at sea. The Law of the Sea Convention and all its attendant mechanisms in particular underpins good order at sea, which is essential for the conduct of free and safe functioning of our global maritime trading system. The diplomatic instrument of national power has a key role to play, not only bilaterally, but of course importantly in the many UN fora where so many of these conventions are developed, their practice is discussed, updated and modified. For Navy too, there is a strong military diplomatic contribution. There is one thing that binds navies across the world, and that is that we are all first and foremost mariners. And people who are not mariners should never underestimate what that statement actually means. I've seen it work in our collective favour so often because of that innate understanding that mariners bring to the resolution of an issue. The existence of fora such as the Western Pacific Naval Symposium, the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, are good examples of important multilateral naval engagement that takes place continuously. Now, these fora have brought navies together not only for discussion, but also at sea through a range of seagoing exercises. We in fact have, as part of the International Fleet Review in October, a significant maritime security exercise taking place off Jervis Bay, involving about 13 nations from the ASEAN Defence Ministers Plus grouping. Now, this will be the first major seagoing exercise for that grouping, and brings together some countries, certainly brings some countries down to Australia for the first time in a very long time, including the Russian Federation, who are sending a number of ships down for that activity. So these things do have broader strategic impact. Now, the work in these fora complements the higher level multilateral activities, such as what occurs in UN organisations like the International Maritime Organisation, or even more broadly in organisations such as ASEAN or the East Asian Summit. We take over chairmanship of the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium in March of next year, which coincidentally is the same time, or roughly the same time, that we take over national chairmanship of the Indian Ocean Rim Association for Regional Cooperation, or IOR-ARC as it's known. It's an important time in the Indian Ocean region, as maritime security issues have some prominence, and it's an area where there is little in the way of formal security architectures. Our goal will be to build on the work of previous IONS chairs to cement the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium as an important Indian Ocean region maritime-focused organisation. Regular exercises, be they humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, search and rescue, or fully fledged warfighting training activities, are also important to help build trust and transparency. Our ships have been engaged in international engagement throughout the Indo-Pacific for decades. Ships are ideally suited to this engagement because they can operate right across the spectrum, from a friendly port call to sitting off a coast, sending a very clear message, which might be construed as less than friendly. We have, over that period, built up a web of routine exercise activities with 16 countries that are either strictly bilateral or part of arrangements such as the five-power defence agreement. We, of course, exercise with a host of other countries through larger multilateral exercises such as RIMPAC or the Indian Navy initiated interaction Millen. These types of activities allow us to develop levels of interoperability and to build trust and transparency and understanding that would not otherwise be possible. And this can directly translate into real-world action that helps preserve our ability to trade. The collective effort of a range of countries engaged in the counter-piracy mission of Somalia is a case in point. As you may know, there is no single counter-piracy force or organisation off Somalia. The contribution is made up of multiple groupings. There's one led by the US, the Combined Maritime Force. There's a NATO task group, there's a European Union task group, and there are a range of individual nations who deploy independently, such as China, Russia and India. Now, this very loose collection had the real potential to make for, frankly, an uncoordinated mess. Instead, as mariners got together and developed the Shared Awareness and Deconfliction process, known as SHADE. And this has helped to coordinate the efforts of nearly 30 navies involved in the counter-piracy mission. It's also brought in maritime industry, which was absolutely critical to getting the merchant ships transiting the region to adopt measures which we felt would be very useful to minimise the impact of piracy. And these coordinated activities have had an enormous impact on the safe passage of goods along such a critical waterway. The Somalia issue also helps illustrate the fallacy of the defend the moat thinkers. Few would argue that the shipping that passes through the Horn of Africa or the Straits of Hormuz has a direct impact on us or our key trading partners. If our force structure does not allow us to be involved in that effort, it means that we are not contributing to this collective challenge. Well, thankfully, we are structured to do this and will remain so. We are able to play our part, as we are right now with the frigate HMAS Newcastle, which is our 55th individual ship deployment to the Middle East since 1990. And while protecting our ability to trade and contributing to the protection of sea lines of communication more broadly is fundamental to a maritime strategy, so too is the ability to project power across the spectrum of conflict. And the two go hand in glove. There is no doubt that the maritime power projection capabilities of the LHD, the Landing Helicopter Dock, when combined with other parts of the broader ADF force structure, will significantly enhance our ability to execute a maritime strategy. And I think the Army's approach to the step function increase in capability that the LHD brings has been terrific. The decision to orientate the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment towards amphibious operations has been, in my mind, a crucial decision. Maritime power projection is a critical capability for the ADF, particularly in its regional role of contributing to the security and stability of the South Pacific and East Timor. So a dedicated focus on further developing the competencies that we need is critical. At the very heart of maritime power projection is the delivery of force from the sea, be that through naval fires, naval gunfire or coastal suppression missiles, or the use and support of land forces in an amphibious activity. But power projection does not always have to involve the use of military forces in a hard power way. Humanitarian assistance and disaster relief and non-combatant evacuation operations are of course a manifestation of the same foundation techniques and capabilities used for harder edge power projection missions, but they achieve important non-combat mission roles. In the LHD, we will have the core of the ADF's hard and soft power projection capability. As important as this capability will be, and as big a challenge as it will be to exploit its full potential, and we should not underestimate how big that challenge will be, I do think we run the risk of being somewhat consumed by it at the expense of other individual domain warfighting disciplines that we must maintain to deliver the overall joint effect. In each domain, we have particular skills that we must excel in. We cannot afford to lose sight of that. If you look at where we're headed from a future force structure perspective in Navy, there is much excitement around the LHD. It is almost with us. We'll be at sea later this year on sea trials, and the crew should take delivery in the first quarter of next year. Another exciting development is the Air Warfare Destroyer, the DDG. That is only a couple of years behind. That will bring a significant increase in our air warfare capability. It will take us beyond, in relative terms, where we used to be with the Charles F. Adams class of DDGs if you go back to the 60s and 70s. It really is another significant step up. We will, of course, be, as the government's announced, replacing the Armidale class patrol boat with a new patrol boat. We'll get new tankers to support our frigates and our DDGs and our amphibious task group. And we'll have a new class of frigate at some time during the next decade. And of course, we will be developing a new submarine force, a much bigger submarine force than we currently have. I think that leaves us in a very good position to undertake the missions that I've been talking about today. Of course, I would be ignoring the elephant in the room if I were not to mention the issue of border protection. There's no doubt in anyone's mind in the Navy that these constabulary roles, which is what the Border Protection role falls under, are a legitimate part of what Ken Booth describes as the Naval Trinity of operations, his Trinity being warfighting, diplomatic and constabulary. It has been thus for centuries. Up front, I'll say what I've been saying for 18 months or so. Navy has a simple role in all of this, and that has always been thus too, and that is to safely execute the lawful direction of government. I don't and won't get into commentary on government policy or other potential policy options, be they government or opposition. Despite how it may be represented, I've never done that, and nor should I. Most of the commentary around, and I use inverted commas, my position on these matters is drawn from testimony that I gave to the Senate Estimates Committee in October 2011. What I was asked and how I answered it is on the public record. It'd be good if people access that a bit more, and I have some copies here if you want me to save your research skills. But I would make the point that testimony and commentary are two very different things, and I was giving testimony. I do reject, very strongly in fact, the assertions that have been made that there is a growing anger in the Navy at the current government border protection policy. This is simply not true. While individuals in any organisation will certainly hold their own views, and some at times will get frustrated, they all understand what our job as a Navy is. I'm going to read an excerpt from an email that the Fleet Commander passed on to me from a patrol boat CO, whose team has been and still is in fact in the thick of it off Christmas Island. In the email, the CO talks about the cancellation for the second time of a logistics visit to Singapore. Now, if you want to talk about bellwether indicators for how sailors are feeling, cancel a port visit. And if you really want to push it, cancel a port visit twice, particularly when it's Singapore. The CO says, the team were really good about our Singapore visit being cancelled twice. In fact, quite a few came to me and told me that they were almost glad because they felt guilty leaving the area with all that was going on and placing extra burden on our comrades. Just goes to show that even the most junior and inexperienced of our sailors can, in times of adversity, see the bigger picture. So long as I get them ashore for a 20-minute duty-free run somewhere before we leave, I'll be happy. Now, this is not the attitude of an angry workforce, nor is it the attitude of an uncaring workforce, as some have suggested. What it represents to me is an outstandingly professional group of mostly young men and women who are doing themselves, the Navy and this country proud every single day out there. They are faced with enormous challenges in this relentless, dangerous and gruelling operation, where their actions and their decisions, often at quite a junior level, face enormous scrutiny, be that in the media, be that by a coroner. It's happening all the time. They are certainly weary when they come off rotation. Would not deny that. And I do care deeply about the potential long-term impact of these activities on them. I've experienced them myself in a slightly different guise, and I know it is not something that we should underestimate or ignore. And that's why we have, in the last couple of years, developed what I think is a very good program of mental health surveillance and support. I think we owe them that, at least, given the dedication and guts that they show every day. So I hope I have laid out a few things for you to think about today. Foremost for me is that you take away why the maritime context and our maritime geostrategic realities are so fundamental to our national security discourse. If we can protect our ability to trade and have a functioning global maritime trading system, we can maintain our national prosperity. That's a national effort that the Navy in particular and the broader ADF have a crucial role to play in. Again, I'm appreciative of the opportunity to come and speak to you today, and I look forward to your questions on what I hope will be a broad range of issues.
Admiral David Rowe from the Sydney Morning Herald. Like Brendan, I'm going to dash your hopes about a broad range of questions, I'm sorry. The Indonesian Defence Minister has pointed out this morning that they are not fully equipped to carry out all of the border protection and maritime safety operations on what is a huge, expansive territory of their country. I just wanted, can you give us your assessment of how equipped Indonesia is to cope with the movement of people in irregular maritime arrivals to the south, and how is your relationship with your Indonesian counterpart? What kind of discussions do you have with your counterpart about this, and how, you know, what can Australia do to help Indonesia in that respect?
Well, I think first of all, the relationship that I have with Admiral Maserio, the head of the Indonesian Navy, is quite a strong one. We have met a couple of times this year. In fact, he hopefully will be coming to Australia in the next couple of months for either a counterpart visit or to the fleet review. So we see each other regularly, and we have good discussions. Of course, we have a very active exercise program with the TNIAL, ranging from patrol boat activities right through to our higher-end frigate activities. So it's a good, solid relationship. We have a lot to talk about in that traditional naval context. We've been doing the coordinated patrols now for some time. Now, they're actually done under the auspices of Border Protection Command, but we clearly provide the ships and the crews to do that. I'm not an expert on Indonesian Navy capacity or Indonesian maritime capacity generally to cover off on the questions that you've asked. What I would say, though, is that I think in Australia we do underestimate the size and the complexity of the maritime landscape in Indonesia. The number of islands, the heavy traffic concentrations that pass through the archipelago. It is a significant maritime security challenge, and the Indonesian Navy, of course, puts a lot of effort into maintaining the integrity of the archipelagic waters and the traffic that moves through it.
G'day, my name is James Stevens, studying political science. Thank you for your presentation, it was wonderful to hear. I have a question regarding, you talked about some of the ships and so forth, the new ships that are coming on board over the coming years. Obviously that'll cost money. I wonder if, is the Navy in a position where if the funding dries up, if governments have to make that decision where they have to cut funding, does the Navy still have the resources available to continue to protect the national interests and so forth, and how important is it to have consistent funding for your plans for the future of the Navy? I wonder if you could touch on that.
Thanks. Well, when you look at the timeframes that are involved in bringing a ship into service, so right now we're in the middle of a very lively public debate about the future submarine. The first of those submarines is not going to enter service until late next decade. But we are making critical decisions right now which will affect that time frame. So that's when the first would come in. The government's plan is to build 12 submarines. That build program is going to go through into the 2040s. So the point I'm trying to make is when you're dealing with 30, 35-year timeframes, you do need some certainty. And of course, governments are very well aware when they commit to projects such as this of what they are committing to, and the percentage of the pie that is going to consume going forward. The bottom line is it is the government's call what resourcing level it wants to apply to defence. The government will make assessments around all its competing priorities. It will make assessments of the strategic risk that it would take by reducing defence spending. Go back to 1932. I think we only had 2,500 people in the Navy in 1932, and we only had 4 or 5 ships operating. And we had several hundred within 10 years. Now, fairly stark circumstances in that 10-year period, I grant you. But the point I'm trying to make is it's a cyclic thing. It's about an assessment of risk, and it's about availability of resources more generally. So yes, assured funding models are fantastic if you can get them, but the reality is it's very hard for governments to project that over that sort of time frame.
I'm wondering, in those 2 years, what kind of repercussions have been picked up on, and what is the Navy doing to address those?
Well, the reality is that the data we have is similar to what we're seeing out of the Middle East. So we're not seeing any particular spike out of domestic operations. It's broadly similar to what we're seeing out of the Middle East. And these are general. Individuals get concerned by different issues. There are a multitude of trigger points that trigger different reactions in people. I mean, I saw it in 2001 with my own team. The important thing is, I think, that we have stepped up the surveillance program and the support program to those involved in Operation Resolute from where we were. And I think it's a good package now, a good package of surveillance, and early identification of issues is paramount. But the other important aspect, from my perspective, is having a culture within the organisation that destigmatises mental health issues and makes people comfortable in raising them and not thinking that it's a career-limiting move or something like that. And I think we've seen in public in the last 12 months or so, people like John Campbell do an outstanding job of helping to build that acceptance and that understanding and to shift the culture in that regard. And that's not just a culture within the ADF. I think that's something that's well recognised as being a national challenge.
Admiral Asave cited from Australian Associated Press. I had a question about recruitment. I was wondering if you think there's a challenge going forward for the Navy in recruiting officers and young cadets, especially given that there's a heavier concentration on asylum seeker boats, and given the media coverage that you discussed today as well, about anger or weariness with officers that are plucking bodies from the sea and things like that. Is there a concern for you going forward in that?
No, what I said was I don't think there is anger.
Yeah.
I just want to get that one on the record again. Look, I don't think that's been a significant factor in our recruiting numbers. In fact, our recruiting numbers are pretty strong, particularly for sailors. In fact, it's almost 100% for sailors. Officers has been a challenge for a few years now, and particularly in the engineering and technical environment, because there is just such an incredible demand across the rest of the economy for those skill sets. So that's the area in terms of recruiting that I am concerned about most. But I think we are below our approved strength at the moment. And that has been the result of a reasonably high wastage in a number of technical areas due to the resource boom, and I've talked about this publicly before. The pull factors from the resource sector are enormous. When you're fighting 3 to 4 times the salary and a very structured fly-in, fly-out regime, that appeals to people when they're sitting at sea, thinking, well, if I knew that I could be home for my son's birthday and it was guaranteed, because I knew I was in a very strict fly-in, fly-out rotation, that becomes very attractive to people. So what are we doing about that? We are working very hard on the tangibles that we can play with. There's not a lot I can do about the broad salary piece. I can do something around individual bonuses, which I do to the limit of my ability. And we have a number of those running, particularly in the technical technical workforce and more broadly in the submarine workforce. I've just this morning been at the Defence Force Remuneration Tribunal giving evidence for our seagoing allowance case, which is an important part of the remuneration of people going to sea, and we're trying to restructure that so that we can change some behaviours and get people back to sea at particular points of their career. But it's the intangible piece as well that's important, the cultural piece. We've been running our New Generation Navy program for just over 4 years. We've started to see some significant changes in the way the Navy operates, the way that people feel comfortable in raising issues and reporting issues. These are all important factors to building a workplace that people want to be in. And when you can't compete on the tangibles in absolute terms, you have to rely on those intangible elements as much as you can, and so we work very hard at that.
Vice Admiral Francis Keeney from Fairfax Radio. You've spoken a lot about Australia's place in the Asian century and the importance of Southeast Asia with protecting trade routes. How important do you think it is on a policy level not for Australia to become complacent over the next decade or two about our capabilities, given the rapidly expanding economies of Southeast Asia?
Are you talking about our military capabilities?
Just in regards to, say, the submarine fleet, for instance, the fairly long time frame that's happening, as well as just general sort of the points that we're making.
It's a long time frame. It was going to be a long time frame, no matter what option you follow, really. We've had the discussion about how big the submarine needs to be, which has consumed a couple of years of fairly vigorous debate, public debate. I think that was a useful discussion to have. The government has made it very clear now what its preferred options are, and that is based around a submarine which is of at least the same size as the Collins class. And we've been operating amongst the largest, if not the largest, conventional submarines in the world since the 1960s. There's a very good reason that we have that size of boat, and I think this behind me gives that away. So I think we've reached a very good point in terms of that part of the discussion. I don't think we're complacent. I don't think we're complacent at all. The fact that we're going from 6 to 12 submarines, I think, shows you we're not complacent, that we understand that this region is a very dynamic one. And predicting the future is, as it always has been, a mug's game. So I think we are very much aware of what we need to do. We are working the submarine piece as quickly as we can, but it is a hugely complex project. A submarine is a hugely complex piece of equipment, and it's not just the submarine, of course. It's the build infrastructure. It's the skills in industry that are required to assemble a submarine in Australia. It's the training infrastructure. It's the wharf infrastructure and all the other facilities that go with a submarine capability, particularly when you're expanding it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think a lot of what the Admiral said is pictured on the chart or the map behind us there. Australia is an island. We are a trading nation, and the seas that surround us are important. They bring us prosperity and security, and I think Admiral Griggs has reminded us very forcibly today that part of that prosperity and security depends on the Royal Australian Navy. As he also reminded us, it depends on a joint force and a whole-of-government approach. And I think it's important that we understand these issues, and I think it's also important in the context of the work that the students are doing here at the University of Canberra, that they hear of that importance of strategy. They hear that we need to be thinking of what our centres of gravity are, the fact that that ability to trade is very important to us. And Admiral, thank you for reminding us of that. Thank you also for telling us what the Navy's doing. I also thank you for not mentioning Mahan during your presentation. We are a trading nation, and the maritime domain does bring us our security. I think the other thing you said that really resounds with me is that you're proud of what the Navy's doing. Well, you should be, and I think we are also proud of what our Navy is doing. So thank you for reminding us of that, and thank you for coming to the University of Canberra today. Could I invite the audience to say thank you in the normal manner?